Welcome back to the channel, KMR Rotary. And well, I've got a motor right here, or a port job at least, that baraps. So we're going to talk a little bit about this custom Bridgeport setup that I'm doing in a collaboration project with GT3s, and a little bit about why I'm excited, why this is unique, and what we're doing with this massive GT style bridge on Cosmo housings, which are similar to fd3s housings. So we have a request recently, road racing, and it was a request for a GT style race motor, traditional Bridgeport, naturally aspirated, not boosted. And the customer was just going for a modern take on what the block could be and what might be the best volume of flow and best characteristics to go with at this current time of building rotary engines. Most of your traditional Bridgeports, your GTU cars, GT3, GT2, IMSA, you think about it, a lot of the bridge porting and naturally aspirated motor building was done more in the 80s and 90s than as of now. And when we think about Bridgeports nowadays, a lot of the times they're associated with turbo motors. And a lot of the times these are more of a performance build than an all-out race build, or just road race track car with a custom dog box and a really close rear end ratio, where naturally aspirated bridges and peripheral ports shine, because having aggressive port timing is a lot like having aggressive cam. So you're moving that power band up and increasing power. So with this request to kind of reinvent the GT Bridgeport, we wanted to see what was available, and obviously the Cosmo and fd3s housings are still available. And one of the minor variations between the two is the Cosmo actually has a slightly taller intake runner on both your primaries and your secondaries. And when you're talking about naturally aspirated volume and high RPM road racing, we wanted to start off with the block or the side plates, side housings that already allowed us the most volumetric flow, since we knew we were going with a giant Bridgeport. And with most GT cars, we did cut through the water jacket. So this is why a lot of Bridgeports traditionally were noted as race motors or as less reliable. Because with your modern turbo bridge or the KMR template, or a lot of what's done these days, we don't cut the water jacket. No cut water jacket. And that's really for reliability. Obviously, you're decreasing the volumetric flow by not making the port as big. And one of the reasons porting went this big, or even more aggressive than this, cutting into this water area, was in the heyday of GT road racing, rotaries did have some dominant forces, and a lot of those cars were packing some massive Bridgeports, exotic porting, and even peripheral porting. And as the rules committees crunched down, people had to get more and more exotic, more and more creative, and Bridgeports and peripheral ports got more and more interesting. And that's some of where we got some of this knowledge, and where things like the semi-peripheral actually came to be, because people were trying to cheat the rules and get around the rule, like, oh, no bridge porting. So they were doing semi-peripheral ports and things like that that were a little more hideable. But disregarding some of that history, it's not very often in my rotary experience, and I've been doing this a while, that we've been able to do a what would I consider more of a giant bridge or traditional GT bridge on Cosmo plates, or a plate that's similar to the fd3s housing. And what we've always heard, and we've never got to test this ourselves at KMR or GT3s, is we've always heard that because we've got bigger runners from the factory, and it is a 4-port design with a nice radius, nice flow, decently thick casting areas, so we are able to port it nicely to shape. We've heard, we've never tested ourselves, but we've heard that people get some pretty impressive horsepower numbers out of these Cosmo or fd3s giant bridge naturally aspirated motors. And we're hoping that Mazdatrix will also be able to get some dynoing in on this. Although it is regulated via induction size, there are regulations to road racing in the class this is getting set up for. I think that it will be interesting to see what kind of numbers this produces in comparison to what traditionally would have been a 12A or 4-port 13B from the past, the 80s motors or the 70s motors, where you didn't have the water jacket in the cast, you actually had it in the rotor housing, so it was being cut out on the rotor housing side. So I think, in my personal opinion, this is still leaving a very nice sealing area. And if you aren't aware, when you do cut your water O-rings for traditional bridge porting, you'll cut it about a 1/4 inch back, and then you will silicone about a 1/2 inch of that area with a high-grade silicone of your choice. I do have my own preference for this, and it will be brought up along this edge. But it's a very tricky assembly process. When you're cutting O-rings and you're siliconing, the block can try to wedge because silicone is a gasket maker that is not spread around the rest of the block. I don't recommend that. We use Hylamar elsewhere. And it has to be assembled quickly. You basically prep all your plates and then stack it together in a flash because you want that silicone to set once it's assembled. And that means you still have to get the block together, get all your seals in, and get your torque process done before that's happening. So GT Bridgeports, or the traditional giant bridges, came with a whole set of not only assembly needs, but knowledge of how to seal them up. And I think in a lot of ways, because turbos became so much more popular, obviously easy horsepower, I love turbos, the rotary industry didn't push bridge porting along as far as they could have, as some of these later model housings became more available. So this is just a really neat project. I thought I would talk a little bit about it before we get it on the dyno, before we get it built, shipped out. Just fresh on the bench, Cosmo based, very similar to the FD motor, giant bridge. And this is probably something that I still wouldn't recommend in a boosted application. I mean, you could do it, but I think the gains in that case are negligible. But in naturally aspirated form, this is a significant change in port timing and overall volume flow, very significant. So in regards to horsepower, we also should get some significant gains in comparison to what the motor would make as a street port or with a small bridge, or in comparison to the traditional 4-port bridge ports, which just did not have this much volume available in the runner shape or in the port shape. So just starting off with a better casting from the factory in the aim and in the goal to make a better GT Bridgeport. So I think that's about a wrap. Thank you, Mazdatrix, bringing this project to us and letting us collab on it. And if anybody's got questions, feel free to ask. And this was a combination of porting templates, kind of a factory CNC bridge that we had access to, the KMR template, and then a little bit of racing beat influence, all to create what Mazdatrix and I deemed both proper in flow and proper in port timing. So that's a brap, and this is for sure going to brap. It's going to brap so hard, it's probably going to blow circles out the exhaust. Can't wait to hear it. Can't wait to dyno it. I'm out of here. Back to work.